Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Upali Nanda and the Where We Learn discussion.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. If you're not in the room, you could miss technology doing other things to me, so. All right. You know, were people here for that moment that the shades went up? Right? It felt so good. It was just this moment, but it was perfect for a brain break. Our panel today, which I am incredibly grateful to moderate, is on where we learn. And I love that we are having this conversation when we are learning in a space like this. We have a wide range of perspectives. We have Dr. Margaret Tarampi, who is at the University of Hartford, but also on the board of directors of ANFA, which is an organization called the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. We have Dr. Kristy Gaines, whose book is actually right out there, who is one of the foremost authorities on designing for neurodiversity and is chair in the Department of Design at Texas Tech. And then we have Max Geron, who's the retired Rockwall police chief, who is going to talk to us about learning and how important that is in high-stress jobs. And I get the privilege of moderating this panel. So thank you all for coming back. Thank you for taking a break. This conversation about where we learn, we wanted to start with making it very, very real. Sometimes we talk about research and practice in two different buckets, and we struggle with how it integrates. So I thought we'd start off with something that actually has happened. This is a campus, UC San Diego, not Torrey Pines, which is a huge academic campus, and Leo is not in the room, but any questions on that you could ask him, which worked. It was on time, on budget. It met all of the needs that we were asking from the project. But here's something else that it did. If you could go to the next slide, or the next prompt. And then me and the clicker will go into therapy sessions. But we'll figure out our relationship, don't worry. But this project was interesting because we could actually, in a real life, huge capital project, which was a live-learn neighborhood on campus, and we talked about it in living environments, show an impact on how very specific design strategies, and you will see that here, and all of those are cited evidence-based works, resulted in very specific outcomes. And there are 4 words, linking design to outcomes, that changes the DNA of how we practice. Link design to outcomes. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Can you achieve it? Can we get there? So from healthy eating to physical activity, socializing, connection to nature, providing multimodal transportation. For each of those, we had strategies that were evidence-based, that were incorporated, and they were incorporated creatively. They were not incorporated in terms of following a prescription. The challenge, and I'll give just one example here, that the challenge was 1 in 4 students at UC San Diego reported a mental health issue. So the outcome we wanted was reduced anxiety. And very specific features in terms of visual transparency, passive cooling for thermal comfort, natural finishes, line of sights, being able to see each other, designing in section, not planned, very specific things. And look at the impact. Pre and post move, same cohort of students, there was an 8.2% reduction in self-reported depression. Real life example, real students, validated study published in a journal. It also had a reduction in the energy use and just got the AIA Code Award. And the reason I state this example is a very real example, is a real project, did not cost more, actually improved both brain health outcomes and environmental outcomes. And the provost declared it as a live-learn lab where we actually use architecture to augment behaviors we want in our community. She declared it the first live-learn lab. And this idea of doing something so simple of linking design to outcomes is you take all of your design strategies and you map them along what do you want to do? Reduce depression, increase satisfaction, increase socializing behavior. Map it, make your intent evident. If you do that, then someone can go back and say, I can evaluate it. Did we meet it as expected? Did we not? Can we not determine? But how do we do that if you don't link your design to outcomes? How do we give design agency if we don't actually make a promise that we're accountable to? So really in this panel, we'll talk about design tools, we will talk about design application, and we will talk about evaluation and building coalitions for evaluation. And most importantly, we will make this promise that design has to improve outcomes, but we must be accountable. We should not do this alone, and we have to understand the science and prove the outcomes to do it effectively together, which is the perfect segue for my dear friend, Dr. Tarampi, to talk about the science. Do you want the clicker, or do you want my danger hands on them? Okay, did everyone hear that? She's like, I will have someone else click them, so she'll say next slide.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next slide, thanks. Okay, so when we're talking about learning, I think we have to say that the brain, or the goal of learning, is to change the brain. And in a more obvious ways related to our discussions here is how brain health affects learning. Obviously, things like sleep, stressors, nutrition, exercise, our environments, how they contribute to our brain health and therefore to learning. But I think also what's important is to think about the ways in which learning affects our brain health. And I, of course, have my notes on my phone, like, okay, so in terms of ways in which our education, both formally and informally, have been associated with better aging brains, I think we also have to think that not only do these things have effects on brain health, but also these are formative times in which a lot of damage could also be done in terms of our brain, right? And this is very much aligned with our schooling, our formal schooling, the first, 20 or so years of our lives, at least in this country. And so this more holistic view of thinking about the ways that cognitive, emotional, social aspects then contribute to our learning and development is so important. Next slide. And we've already heard about neurogenesis, but the broader aspect of this is called neuroplasticity, and that's the idea that neurons can change and reorganize even through our adulthood, and that this happens in a experience-dependent manner, and that is affected by what's in our environments. And I'm saying environments in this case more broadly, to not only include the physical environment, but also the cognitive environment, the social environment, et cetera. Neuroplasticity, I think, is important in terms of our discussion here. It happens in infancy, right, when the brain is forming and it's making a lot of changes and it's reorganizing itself. It happens during brain injury, when the brain is going to maximize function or it's going to compensate for other functions. It's happening through adulthood when we learn and when we are trying to encode things in our memory. Next slide. And so when we're talking, when we're talking about learning, we're talking about how neuroplasticity is related to learning, and that is about how it's making connections, actual connections in our brain. Our neurons are talking with each other, are then formulating or allowing us to be able to learn, be able to remember, be able to retrieve information later on as we need that information. And psychologist or developmental psychologist Vygotsky made this argument for this kind of balance that's needed between support and challenge. And so I think what this suggests is that in terms of our learning environments, we really need to think of learners as not passive recipients of information, but actually active recipients. I think I challenge you to think about, when did we decide that sitting was the best way to learn? And how has that been pervasive in the ways that we have created learning environments? Next slide. And so what is the role of the built environment? Certainly, this is a very prevalent already in our discussions today, but the role of how enriched environments can increase neuroplasticity. And so we see this is not just in terms of connections, it's terms in brain size, it's in terms of growth of new neurons, and this is predicated on the ideas that our environment is more holistic, and humans, and we also have to think about humans as whole beings, right, that have sensory systems, that have somatosensory systems, so motor systems, have cognitive systems, have psychosocial aspects that all need to be nurtured in order to have kind of an optimal space for building and learning, or for learning and memory. Next slide. And I think the last point to be made is that there's a great deal of research that supports the ideas of how the enriched environments also contribute to not only dealing with some sort of brain damage that might happen early in life, or also in terms of dealing with things like learning deficits. There's a huge part of that in terms of our roles as designers or builders or developers or policymakers in realizing that our learning environments, again, both the formal and informal, are having tremendous impact in the longevity of our lives, in the ability for optimization of our potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kristy.
If you'll show me the right button.
So you're going to figure out if it was me or
It's
the
this
clicker.
one?
Yes.
Okay. I know. Well, I don't want to do the same thing.
After all these years.
So I'm Kristy Gaines. I'm a designer. My background is in interior design, and I'm currently the chair and a professor at Texas Tech University, the Department of Design. So I started researching designing for neurodiverse populations about 20 years ago, and at the time, there was literally not much out there. And so that's why I really became interested in the topic. Plus, I'd been around some individuals who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. There wasn't a whole lot known about it at the time. And so fast forward 20 years, now there's a lot of information out there, and people are understanding the importance of the built environment. So this is just kind of an overview of some of the research that I've done through the years. These little icons over here represent some sensory principles for designing for all people. And so guess what? What you probably already know, what we found out when we designed for people on the spectrum or neurodiverse populations, it benefits everybody and all users. And so we also found that out in our research. We did a lot of interviews, observations, those sort of things, but we also did a study using the fMRI machine. We have a neuroimaging institute at Texas Tech. We wanted to see if really anything happened in the brain between individuals who were neurodiverse and neurotypically developing individuals. And guess what? Yes, they do interact with their environments differently. We use 6 different virtual environments. This is an example of it here. And they were actual videos where they could maneuver through the space. I'm going to move on quickly. I could get stuck talking on things. Not the built environment per se, but I also worked with apparel design and manufacturing, and we created some clothing for individuals on the spectrum. So that's like a near environment. And that informed us a lot about textiles to use in the environment. And then I have recently, recently as in the past 9 years, been working on outdoor learning environments. This is quickly, just to show you, people often think the environment, they need to remove all the stimuli because of hypersensitivity, but no, people can be hyper or hypersensitive. And this little chart just kind of shows the different reactions that you can see in an environment. We look at this whole child approach. So there are a lot of different domains that we want to look at. And I want to point out the benefits of nature. So there's kind of a theme running here, and I was really excited to see that because this is what we're looking at too, because even though I've done a lot of work on interior learning environments, a lot of the same principles can be developed into the external environment. And so I've become a part of this coalition, Ole Texas, and you can see all the partners there. We lead the design team at Texas Tech, and I've been a part of designing about 20 of these across Texas at this point. So I want to show you, we think of learning environments over there on the left. This is actually a really good one. This is the San Antonio Zoo School. And there are a lot of, I won't go into the individual features of that classroom, but on the outside, these are also learning environments. And this is educating people on the difference. People often think of manufactured play equipment, and we work with that if people want it. But we use 12 best practices to implement these outdoor environments. So you can see that very top one. They could be learning about STEM, balance, heavy. We've got a sensory path on the bottom. We've got just sticks that they can create. There's multiple ways to use these environments. Where a slide, there's one. You can see the plan here, and transition spaces are really important also. And we even can use those as outdoor classrooms if it's too much sun or if it's raining that day, we can still take people out. Oh, and I'm out of time. So I'll finish with this. I brought a couple of copies of the book if you want to look at them. I'm going to leave them here today. And you can find these resources on the Coalition for Natural Learning website. 2 of these, the guides, the design guide and the inspector guide, are available for free download. You can just download them. The other 2, those are for our designer training. We have a designer training every year where we provide a training for designers that want to learn about the outdoor learning environment.
Thank you, Kristy. And the book is out there. I highly recommend going through that. Max.
Give this back to you.
I don't know.
Okay.
So, good morning. I just want to start off, and I apologize, Table 1, you're going to hear this again, but this fulfills a lifelong dream of mine, like George Costanza. Today I get to pretend that I'm an architect. You won't have to hear that again. I'm excited to be here, and when I was invited, I tried to figure out how I fit in, and I am now seeing perhaps how that is. And so Sandy mentioned we're here in Texas because we can make the biggest impact here, and we can absolutely do that, especially in terms of law enforcement, where my passion lies. We'll start off. Thankfully, I only have one slide, so if it goes wrong, it's not my fault. But we'll talk about the numbers, and the numbers are quite stark in terms of suicidality and mental health and well-being and behavioral health of our first responders. So in 2021, you see the total number of first responder suicides of 149 as compared to 73 felonious homicides of officers. So you see there that suicidality outpaces line of duty felonious deaths by about 2 to 1. And unfortunately, we're trending that way here in 2024. Texas has a distinction that we trade off periodically with California of being the state that has the highest number of law enforcement first responder suicides in the nation, something that I would love for us to be able to get rid of. And our suicide rate is about 54% higher than that of the general population. Why is that? And how do we affect that? And we do that with intentional training and education. So it's imperative that because we know this exists, and we know that the trauma that law enforcement officers and first responders experience throughout their career is cumulative, right? There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. It physically and psychologically impacts our bodies, and our bodies hold that stress. And that's the reason, and I think I misspoke earlier today. I told someone that our life expectancy of police officers that live and die of natural causes is actually about 66 years old. Our planned retirement age is about 58, so good luck enjoying those last 8 years of your life after you retire, right? So we have to, in our spaces of training and education, prepare to address both the young individuals that come in with no law enforcement background and prepare them both for the job itself and for that work-life balance that we've talked about. And I love your analogy of the whole, dealing with the whole person, because again, we know that these stressors exist in this career that we're sending our officers into, and so it's incumbent upon us to train them and prepare them so that they have resiliency and the ability to go on. And not only do we have to prepare for the young officers who are being brought into this culture and training them in this culture, ideally that is one of active bystandership, so we teach them how to look out for one another and how to address those problems when perhaps we may not see that in ourselves. Our partners or our coworkers can help us address that and be more healthy, but also for those older in their career officers, and how do we design spaces that facilitate those one-on-one conversations. What do those modular spaces look like? And I'll touch on that photograph that I was fortunate enough to have someone send me. I can tell you exactly where that picture is. That picture is hanging in the Dallas Police Academy in the break room where you walk out. I spent 29 weeks there many years ago, more than I care to remember. And it says, you're important, wear your vest. Yeah, that communicates that you need to wear your ballistic vest because you're important to your children and to your families. But it also communicates that our spaces where we learn are important, because that photograph had an impact on me, so much so that I remember exactly where it is. And we need to be cognizant of that when we're designing our spaces for these high-risk jobs. And how do we use the spaces that we spend these monies on? How do we maximize their long-term effects for the betterment of our first responders? So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Max. So we have a little bit of time to have some conversation with the panelists, and we couldn't have asked for a larger diversity of perspective, so we feel very lucky. Margaret, you're very unique in that you went to architecture school, you got a degree in architecture, then you got a degree in neuroscience, got your PhD there, and now you bridge the fields. Tell us a little bit about how important that science is, and if after becoming a neuroscientist, you went back to design, what would you do? Like, what would your message for the educators be on learning the science to do design?
Oh, goodness. I think in my position, before, when I was just an architect, but before, I think everything to me was related to architecture, and I still feel the same way, but I also feel that way about the brain. And so to see the world and to view my practice, my scholarship, and my teaching through the lens of both architecture and the brain, I think has really influenced the ways of which I teach. So as an educator, a lot of times I have to adapt to the space. Knowing the things I know about the brain, knowing that the brain needs more than just cognitive stimulation. It needs to have, again, as I said before, active participation. And so a lot of the spaces that I have to teach in don't allow for that. And I know my colleagues as well have to adapt to the spaces instead of the spaces giving us the tools or being a support to what we're trying to do in the classroom. So I think if I were to rethink or to design a learning environment, which is pretty much all environments, I think that I'd probably very much focus, I think, be human-centered, think about what is the actual goal of that space, and then from there, think about or rethink about the ways in which we make assumptions as to how we typically address those issues.
Thank you. I remember getting into neuroscience for the first time. I was like, oh, this unlocks new ways of thinking for designers. Why don't we have psychology 101 classes? Has anyone gone to design school with psychology 101? Not. No? You vote for the idea. Right, but design school doesn't have psychology classes though, right? So
Yeah, we have environment and behavior.
there you
Sure
go.
do. Yeah.
So then perfect segue to you, Kristy, that you have spent time in academia doing research meant for practice, meant for application. Talk a little bit about what you would have this room think about and what's missing in that translation, and maybe bring it back to some places having that primer on psychology and learning.
That was a lot to cover. I think what really surprised me when I started looking into this is people didn't consider how the built environment impacts things such as learning. Even teachers that had a lot of knowledge and had worked with people, these children, and had seen how the environment plays a role, it still didn't connect that this was important. I mean, I think one of the things that we do teach, of course, our graduate programs were very big on this environment and behavior, but even in the undergraduate level, we are really trying to communicate to people that the physical environment does play a big role in environment and in behavior. Yes.
So from a perspective of an academic doing research meant for practice, now you have a lot of practitioners in the room and you have a lot of decision makers in the room. Any advice that you have for what we might change or do differently?
So I was a practitioner also, so for a while, and I'm glad I had that experience. And I have to say, I thought a lot about function and aesthetics. I did not give a lot of consideration to the way the environment really does influence people. And I think you just have to, there is a lot of information out there now. And I think you just have to be willing to read and learn and try to keep up with the trends, or I hate to use the word trend, but I mean for the understanding of the knowledge. There are a lot of people trying to translate it for the general population, because a lot of times researchers talk about statistical analysis and t-tests and those kinds of things, that is not as helpful many times for practitioners. So, but there is a lot of literature out there that is for general practitioners that don't want to take a statistics class to understand.
I can give testament to that hiring researchers embedded in practice, one of the key reasons is so that they can have that translator role between the research and the design. So that's a great point.
And for educational environments, a lot of times that is the reason for doing remodeling or upgrades or renovations. They want to see that it will have an impact on learning. It's not just simply to make it newer and fresher.
Yep. So you're going to have to explain to me someday why more educational environments don't require evaluations, right? Because you'd think that's where it would go. So Max, when you joined the panel and we started talking, you were like, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a designer, but you're actually living the model of why lifelong learning is a tool for mental health and brain health. Like, you're living that principle. So for you, I'd really ask this question of, if you were an architect, if your lifelong dream was fulfilled, how would you build differently?
Wow, thanks for putting me on the spot.
Pretty much my job.
So because of my journey, I'll share with you what I tell folks. After having gone through July 7th, 2016, where 5 officers were shot and killed in downtown Dallas, I'm not ashamed to say I didn't start my career as a law enforcement officer dealing with anxiety and depression, but I have certainly found myself towards the end or sunset of my career dealing with those exact things. And so for me, it's very personal that we invest in our most valuable resource, and those are the men and women that are sworn and civilian professionals. And we owe them a duty, knowing what we know about this profession, to help insulate and build them to be more resilient, and give them those tools and provide those environments. So I'm excited for the new Dallas Police Academy and what it's going to bring to the next generation of recruits. But as I was sitting here thinking about that, they're going to all transition to various substations that were built in different decades and different eras and that are differently equipped. So how do we, and I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but I think, how do we help sustain that positive and healthy culture with the help of our environment in a building that was designed 20, 30, 40 years ago? So those are the things that I think that's how my personal experience is helping influence what I'm trying to do and helping fuel my the creativity and the ideas and the thinking and the innovation part that helps me to thrive.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And one of the things that was interesting, and Margaret, you said that every environment is a learning environment. And then you talked about how learning environments are mental health
Absolutely.
environments. Talk a little bit more about that.
So when we talk about the culture of bystandership and helping one another, in Dallas, thankfully adopted active bystandership and trains its officers on how to overcome inhibitors to stepping in and intervening in other coworkers' conduct to help reduce mistakes, prevent misconduct, and save lives and careers. We need to think about how we have those conversations. Some of those conversations between each other can be difficult, and do we have spaces for that? Or do we have a building that only facilitates a meeting space, a few IT items, maybe a break room and some restrooms, because that's the low bid stuff, that's what we can get away with? Or do we, and I loved that we talked earlier about engaging the employees in that discussion. That's leadership, right? That is the core of leadership, and talking with your employees and getting their input, and how do we do this job better? That gives me, as the employee, a sense of control in an environment that lacks control in so many instances. And that's how I, as a worker, thrive. So those kinds of spaces that promote that and facilitate that, I think, are the healthiest version of the future that we want for policing.
I love that. And if you ask the design community, I want a space that promotes conversations. It's very different from saying, I want a room.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So it's a little bit of changing the design brief on what are we actually asking our spaces to do, and talking about the outcomes, which changes the conversation fundamentally. Kristy, we'll end with you on the panel discussion side. You started with neurodiversity, and then you said when we design for neurodiversity, we benefit everyone. Could you talk about that and help us close out this idea of designing for different brains?
So there is quite a bit of research out there showing that there are benefits to everybody. And I mean, we know this even with ADA. If there's a ramp, a lot of times we want to walk up the ramp instead of the steps. It can benefit all people. There are so many different aspects to it. For example, in our outdoor learning environments, we put this curvy looping pathway, and I was thinking about the previous panel and how that could even be adapted for people with Alzheimer's. I'm not an expert in that area at all, but I have done some study, and I've taught a class that deals with that, not specifically just that, but as one of the populations. And I know for wandering behavior, like this looping pathway that takes you through the space and creates movement is a benefit. It increases activity and motion. That benefits everybody to get us moving instead of just staying stagnant in one place. I mean, there are so many different examples, but that's one.
Yeah. Thank you. And it brings back the idea that we had about multi-generational living. It's multi-generational learning. And it is this sense of community, like it's this theme that's coming out constantly about being connected at multiple ways to connect our neurons at the end of the day. So we'd love to open it up now for questions and conversation. We have one right there.
Thank you so much for sharing. My name is Marissa, and my company is Inclusive Wellness Design, and I work in higher ed spaces. And I've been working with some college students, interior design students, to design their own healing spaces on campus and experiential learning spaces on campus. And the number one feedback I get is that from the design students, and this might be familiar to you all, is that there's no space to cry. Very telling. And then, of course, pandemic, the rates of suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression keep going up. But we've struggled to kind of implement some of these designs at navigating the bureaucracy. And I was curious if there is any kind of movement to integrate some of the design elements that really work well in elementary ed, that are accommodating to neurodiversity, that are promoting cognitive health and joy and exploration, all the joy elements that get sucked out as we get older, and we really need that. Are we seeing any growth or interest in, because that's also promoting student retention and differentiation in the market. Just curious to see that in higher ed specifically.
I'll answer, but also I think Upali probably has better responses to, or more informed responses to this. I have been seeing this in terms of higher ed, but it is not in some sort of systematic way. I think it's as it happens in many areas of design, that it's really driven, like client-driven, rather than being driven by the design fields.
Well, I can speak to Texas Tech, and I can speak about some of my own research. So I have actually done some research, not just with small children, but with adults, these intentional living communities, that sort of thing, and even more classroom spaces. And a lot of times we focus on small children because we can feel like we can make a bigger impact there, and it help them to learn to accommodate. At Texas Tech, I will say I'm actually on this wellness committee that we have, and we have these mind spas where people can go, and we've got virtual environments, and we're integrating these wellness centers kind of at different spots across campus. It's very early planning. But I think that is in higher ed. I think it's gaining momentum at a lot of universities.
Leo Gonzalez, I'm Director of Education at HKS, and the truth is that it's happening in pockets, but I think we need to own the responsibility as designers to push our clients there, You reminded me of a project we're doing at UT San Antonio. It's a student housing project where we uncovered this by engaging students deeply in their needs, that they needed a space to cry. And the clients were present in that conversation, and they were floored, and some of them cried themselves, and they couldn't believe that this was a need so explicitly. And so we built it into the design solution. But it is only if we are willing to have the moment to go there and have those deep conversations and lead our clients there. So I don't know that they're going to change on their own, because I don't think that with everything that they're doing that there's enough bandwidth to think about that. So I think that's where we go.
It occurs to me as I'm hearing this, and I'll tie it back to the aftermath of July 7th. So research tells us that critical incident stress management, or necessarily prompting first responders to talk about their feelings after a traumatic event, isn't necessarily the best way to go. We as first responders are fairly good at processing that in the short term. What really helps us are tactical style debriefings that help fill in the blanks, right? So if the mind doesn't understand something or doesn't know a factoid about a particular incident, our brains will fill that in. They'll create that because it has to make sense. And oftentimes that's incorrect information. So these tactical debriefings are opportunities to hear about what occurred and what the perceptions were from the other officers and individuals involved in the incident, filling that gap in, bringing some resolution to this trauma. While not designed to be emotional events, those can absolutely be emotional events. And so does that occur? Is it best for that to occur in a briefing room where your normal everyday activities go? Or is there a space that we could set aside that maybe is a little more conducive? So I think those are some thoughts. I don't know the exact answer, but I appreciate that conversation's taking place.
You know, what I love about the responses to that excellent prompt is you need the spaces to cry and to be. You need the conversations that discover that you need those spaces. And you need to realize that the way of dealing with grief and trauma and all of that is multi-layered. And so you need the place to cry, but you need the place to have the information, and you need different facets of it. And we keep going back to, we have to change the brief. Because if the brief asked for this, and if the process was brain healthy of engaging everyone and bringing all of those insights, it would change our profession so quickly. So loving the discussion. Other questions? Debbie.
Actually, I just have a follow-up, very quick case study. Past clinician, past healthcare executive. I was over a very large counseling center, and we had a patient that came in quite frequently, and she was always at the highest anxiety, aggressive, not doing well. And I did not know, but when she would come into the lobby, and she would start rearranging the lobby to the lights, the chairs where she sat, how the pamphlets were on the table. She wanted to open the window, and unfortunately the windows were unable to be locked for obvious reasons. So we're at a meeting, and our facilities got a text. He says, I got to go to our counseling center because our patient's going to start rearranging the furniture again. I'm like, what's going on? So I said, don't let her rearrange it. Don't change it back, because every time she would come out of her session, she would come back and she'd want to go back in the lobby and rearrange that they had removed the furniture around. So later that night, without an IRB approval, I went to the video cameras and I watched what she was doing. You know, what was she doing with her chair? Why was she arranging these things? So I told our facilities, don't change anything. Leave it as is. So the next time she came in, she walks into the lobby, and she's confused. She doesn't have anything to be mad about because things were the way she put it. And she would come and touch things, but she would really not remove them. So for the first time, our psychiatrist was able to start breaking through and managing her anxiety and her aggression. And while she was there, so months later when she stabilized, I asked her to come and talk with me. And I said, tell me about your experience. So she was making an un-trauma-informed environment trauma-informed without realizing it. So we had multiple conversations. We actually sat down with her psychiatrist and started helping her to understand how she responded to her environment in other facilities. So it was a huge awakening for us at the time. I was the client building a new facility, so we used her information to inform our psychiatrists, our staff, everybody about what we wanted in our new facility. So it really does make a difference, because we would not have gotten her to the point where she was doing much better without watching what she was doing. So just as an example, so it's
That's a
great
wonderful
case study.
story, Debbie. That's a wonderful story, and it also reminds you that it's having this passive effect on us, but we don't recognize it and we don't act on it. So that awareness is so key. Also, something we didn't talk about earlier is you're stuck with it. So you want to be very careful about what you're stuck with and how much flexibility you keep in it to be able to move to afford different human needs. So thank you for that. Erin.
Hey, this is Erin. I love that story so much. I have to talk to you. I work with the Trauma Informed Design Society and a number of different, I've written chapters on this. I'm working with other people writing chapters on this because it's such a under-researched, but also just like under-shared. So what she was doing was so smart and so intuitive, and we are intuitive creatures, and we're like untaught that. And so I love that story. I just, thank you.
Just talk back. Hi, I'm Leslie.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm a former current special education teacher, and in my line of work and being in the classroom for many, many years, in special education, we always got the used chairs, the used computers, the rooms that were far, far away, too small, no windows. And thinking about how design and environments impact learning in so many different ways, just from a perspective of being in the classroom, can you think or suggest 2 or 3 things that would be beneficial to those of us who are in classrooms and work particularly with individuals with special needs, and how those things can, we don't have to necessarily pay for them because that's usually the case, but how they can promote what we've been talking about today.
That is great, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because design does not necessarily have to be expensive. A lot of the examples that we show, they had high budgets, but there are a lot of things that you can do. If you could rearrange furniture so that you have breakout spaces, maybe in the back, maybe you have bookshelves or something where you can separate. Sometimes just turning off the overhead fluorescent lights or LEDs, even LEDs flicker sometimes, and having lamps around the room. Simulated nature views of some sort, so images maybe that are incorporated with some simulated nature has been shown to help. Some comfortable seating in that back area, maybe with a beanbag chair, something like that. Allowing even those little cubbies, creating some kind of little cubbies and allowing the people that are using those to personalize those spaces in some way. They get to have their favorite color. They love Legos, and they've got a picture of Legos up there, that sort of thing. Those are a few things that can be implemented.
Can I add something? Yes. Sorry, I don't mean to reply to every question, but we have, where are you? Sorry. In collaboration with CADRE, we did some research and developed a guide that is open source and free to download for anybody. And it is a visual design guide for enriched environments for learning that support social emotional learning. And in it, it includes a guide that will guide you through the process of modifying your environments so that you support different learning outcomes. And it is rooted in literature review and then in a research project that we did through a collaboration with one of our clients and through research in CADRE. So if you go to CADRE's website, you can download that there.
It's actually in the know before you go materials too. So it was the slide we were showing on the visual design guide, and everybody got a know before you go packet. That's actually one of the pre-reads in it. But I'm glad you brought that up and took my line, Leo. But to Kristy's point, that some things are really simple that you can do, and there are a lot of guides and tools out there. It's, again, the reason this group is together is connecting what's available to who needs it at the right time, and that's sometimes a connection that doesn't happen. Steve, yes, we had her before you, Steve, and plus you dissed me earlier. So.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the conversation. I'm Darylyn Cardona-Bailo with the Beddoes Mental Health Policy Institute, and Max, a big fan. So thank you so much for all your work in advancing mental health for our first responders and our officers. As we continue to promote and advance health and justice initiatives, we are working closely with detention facilities and promoting the development of spaces that bring trauma-informed to locations that are in nature, driven by safety and control. And we focus on supporting the mental health detainees as part of my work. And a lot of the times we forget the officers. And you talk about the importance of creating the space for debriefing and a good space to sort of like cry, even though officers will never say that they cry. But what else can the spaces have that are beyond the functions of your work that can promote health and well-being for the workforce, that are not necessarily driven by the workflows of your day-to-day lives?
It's a great question, and thank you for that. Thank you for your very kind comments. I was just telling Kristy, as she is giving those suggestions and describing the learning environments for the kids, I'm picturing those nooks, those cubbies that, and I found it, very relaxing as I'm thinking through that. As I thought about creating these work environment spaces, in addition to being functional, I think they have to be changeable. I think they have to be adaptable to provide culture reinforcement. So like the photograph that I shared, that's a picture of culture, right? It's a culture of safety, a culture of, look, ballistic vests in the summer in Texas are miserable. They're very sweaty, but if you can get a recruit officer to start wearing that vest, and it's easy to do that, you tell them to do that, and they have to do that. But once they graduate from the academy, then that practice can lax. But if you can build that habit and get them acclimated to being uncomfortable, then they tend to continue to wear it. So in those spaces, provide imagery, whether that's audio, visual, either static or dynamic imagery that reinforces the culture that you're looking for. Examples of people doing the right thing, examples of successful interventions. I think the Officer Wellness Unit at the Dallas Police Department currently is doing a great job providing testimonials outside their office on a video screen. I think that's just one aspect. Somebody being vulnerable, right? Great leadership is inspired through appropriate and calculated vulnerability. If I can share with you that, yeah, I struggle with this, then you sit back and go, oh, I thought I would. Now I'm no longer alone, right? These are struggles that I can overcome. So with that in mind, providing opportunities, spaces, and reinforcement, this is what we expect from our officers. And part of what we expect is healthy, well-intentioned behavior. Those are my thoughts.
And Max, what's lovely about your example, I think that photograph should be actually a great example for brain health, because it is about physical safety, but in the framework of psychological safety, in a place you can actually see it made accessible to all. And those are all design elements to it. So really appreciate bringing that up. We're almost at time, but there was one person who was waiting, too.
Thank you. My name is David Marquis. Julie asked me to be here today to be a deep green voice in the room. So this deep green voice asks this question, which is, we make this statement, which is that every learner can learn by being in nature. Nature is a great classroom. DEI is a big controversial topic these days, but nature teaches us diversity and equity and inclusion. Everyone can benefit being outside. We used to take the entire 8th grade of our school out in nature for a week every fall and live outdoors with kids, and they loved it. So I encourage everyone, whenever you design a built environment, to keep the learning aspect, all aspects of it, focused on nature. So often the built environment, the building takes up the space, and then we think about landscaping later. Landscaping is not nature. There's a difference between the two. If we want to learn, you go outside and look around. Nature will teach you. So I encourage everyone in here, every design, every building, everything you do, landscaping is not nature. Make the nature piece of it part of the outdoor learning experience and part of the total experience. And we all will benefit from that because nature is a great teacher. Thank you.
I love that. What a great thought to close on. The nature of learning and learning from nature, special education and making education special, and always making sure that when we are learning towards brain health and through brain health. So thank you all for your time today, and thank you for this incredible audience. Yeah.
All right, it's time for us to exercise. Again, and I heard that in order for us to make it a little bit warmer here, we have to actually exercise our brains a little bit more. So this is a really good segue. Quick question for everyone. When your computer is not cooperating, what do you do? What's the sure fix? Call Upali. That's the first time I'm hearing that. I think I heard a lot of right answers. Yes, turn it back on. Turn it off and turn it back on. And I think when we talked about neural plasticity and then we talk about neurogenesis, the fact that your brain starts anew every day is a big deal. What are we doing with that information that we have? That we have to reboot, and sometimes maybe it doesn't fix your computer, but that it can fix our mind. It's pretty fascinating. So I'd love for you all to discuss in your table. Please don't think that we are not creative. When we click through and go through the next question, it's going to be strangely familiar. But there is a reason. It's because we are trying to dive into these different environments. So the question again is, what key elements would help you cognitively thrive in your learning environment? When we think about learning, we start with the smallest, the ones who are newest in the universe, our children, right? But we often forget that we are actually learning every day. So we would want you to take that moment to think, where can I thrive? What kind of an environment can I find myself learning more? And then what can you do professionally? Because we are constantly in an environment where others are learning. So what can we do through the jobs that we have to actually create these thriving learning environments? 2 speech bubbles for each one of you. I think it's going to go a little bit smoother now. But first discuss, talk about it, and then, like I said, we're going to have 2 key takeaways.